John Locke on sense perception. Here's John Locke. He lived in the late 1600s. His book, which we're reading an excerpt from, an essay concerning human understanding, came out in 1690 and is one of the great works of English-speaking philosophy. He also happened to have drafted up the fundamental constitutions of Carolina, which governed South Carolina when it was still under the Lords Proprietors. Locke worked for Shaftesbury, one of the proprietors. Now, Locke on the knowledge of the existence of other things. Locke thinks that there's three sources of knowledge: intuition, reason, and sensation. We are going to be focusing on sensation. And he says, no particular man can know the existence of any other being, but only when by actual operating upon him, it makes itself perceived by him. Now, here's his basic claim. When we receive a sense idea, receiving that sense idea makes us know that something does exist at that time without us, which causes that idea in us. Okay, I want you to note how modest this claim is. What he's saying is that when you have a sensory perception, you can know for sure that there's something outside of your mind that causes you to have that sensory idea. That's what he means by without us. He means outside of us. So he says, while I write this, I have, by the paper affecting my eyes, that idea produced in my mind, which whatever object causes, I call white, by which I know that that quality or accident does really exist and has a being without me. So at the time while you're having a sensory idea, you can know that there's some object out there causing you to have it. Now, you don't know how long that object has existed necessarily. You don't know what that object really is. You don't know if it has any resemblance necessarily to the sensation you're having. You just know that there's something outside your mind causing that sensory idea. Now, Locke thinks that our senses just give us this kind of basic knowledge of that fact. And that's as high a proof as we could ever want. However, he also gives us 4 corroborating reasons to accept the claim that sensation gives us real knowledge. And he states these first 4 reasons very quickly, one after another, in section 3, all in one paragraph, almost all in one sentence. But I want to unpack each one of them as their own separate arguments so we can look at them critically. Now, the first argument is this. He says, nobody can in earnest be so skeptical as to be uncertain of the existence of those things which he sees and feels. Now, here's how I formalize this. I summed up this quote here in this first premise. Nobody seriously doubts their senses. And that seems kind of common sense. I mean, do people really not know whether they're living in the matrix or not? Most people really believe their senses. And the conclusion he wants us to get to in all of these arguments is this. Therefore, our senses give us knowledge of things in the external world. Now, as it's stated, that's not quite a valid argument. There's at least one missing premise. Now, with all of these arguments, I'm going to use the strategy that I taught you earlier to fill in the missing premises. That is, let's make this a valid modus ponens argument by inserting the unstated premise, which is a conditional. If nobody seriously doubts their senses, then our senses give us knowledge of things in the external world. But when you spell it out clearly like that, it raises a real question. Premise 1 was pretty plausible, but what about premise 2? Why should I think that's true? I mean, after all, maybe it's true that we all believe our senses and we're all wrong. Just because we all trust our senses doesn't mean that our senses are reliable, does it? So it's not clear why we should accept this crucial premise. Let's look at argument 2. He says, at least he that can doubt so far, whatever he may have with his own thoughts, will never have any controversy with me, since he can never be sure I say anything contrary to his opinion. And now what's he saying there in that convoluted sentence? Well, he's saying what I summed up in premise 1. Skeptics can never be sure that anyone disagrees with them. Okay, and we're supposed to conclude from that therefore our senses give us knowledge of things in the external world. Well, again, there's an unstated premise here. If skeptics can never be sure that anyone disagrees with them, then our senses give us knowledge of things in the external world. But again, it's not obvious to me why we should think that premise 2 is true. It seems perfectly conceivable that both these things are the case. We can't be sure of the existence of other people or of other things. Why couldn't those both be the case? His third argument, as to myself, I think God has given me assurance enough of the existence of things without me, that is outside of me, since, by their different application, I can produce in myself both pleasure and pain, which is one great concern of my present state. Now, my premise keyword is since. So here's the premise, and the first part of the sentence is actually the conclusion. So premise 1, by the different applications I make of what appear to be external objects, I can produce in myself both pleasure and pain. Therefore, our senses give us knowledge of things in the external world. So, when you eat those things that appear to be sandwiches, you can cause yourself the pleasure of being satiated. That's his idea. Well, again, there's a missing premise here. And the premise is this. If by these different applications I make of what appear to be external objects, I can produce in myself both pleasure and pain, then our senses give us knowledge. And again, we can question that premise. Why think it's true? Think about Descartes' evil demon. Maybe his evil demon makes you feel pain when you stub your illusionary toe on an illusionary rock. Maybe the evil demon makes you feel the pleasure of satiation when you eat the illusion sandwich. So it's not clear to me why we should hold premise 2. And then argument 4, he says this is certain. The confidence that our faculties do not herein deceive us is the greatest assurance that we are capable of concerning the existence of material beings. For we cannot act anything but by our faculties, nor talk of knowledge itself but by the help of those faculties, which are fitted to apprehend even what knowledge is. Now here's his point. We need our sensory faculties in order to even act at all, or to even talk about knowledge. And the conclusion is supposed to be, therefore our senses must give us knowledge. Again, there's a suppressed premise here, an unstated premise. We need to spell it out. What is it? If we need our sensory faculties in order to act at all, or to talk about knowledge, then our senses give us knowledge of things in the external world. And again, we can ask, why think that premise is true? Maybe you need a faculty for sensory perceptions, which are all illusions, in order to talk about knowledge or to even act. The mere fact that you need a sensory faculty in order to do these things doesn't guarantee, it seems to me, for all we can tell, it doesn't guarantee that sensory faculty is giving you reliable sensations. Now, Locke goes on to give 3 more supporting arguments at greater length that for his claim that perceptions are produced in us by external causes affecting our senses. But I will come back to those in the next video.